Forgive your brother or sister from your heart. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. On August 5th, 1881, a Sioux Indian chieftain named Crow Dog killed a Brule Sioux named Spotted Tail. A tribal council was called to deal with the killing according to Sioux tradition. After a long time in deliberation and prayer, the council called the tribe together to hear its decision. Crow Dog was to pay $600, a huge sum in 1881, to support the family of Spotted Tail, as well as give them 8 horses and all the blankets they would need for the rest of their lives. The 2 families and the whole tribe agreed. This was during a time when South Dakota Sioux lands were being settled by white people, and the United States authorities were appalled at what they saw as a light sentence being issued by this tribal council. They ordered that Crow Dog be tried by the territorial court system, where he was found guilty of murder and sentenced to be hanged. Crow Dog appealed his case to the United States Supreme Court, which surprisingly ruled in favor of Crow Dog. He went back to his tribe and honored the decision of the tribal council. He took care of the family of Spotted Tail for the rest of his life. Then his descendants continued to provide food, horses, and blankets to the descendants of Spotted Tail for many generations, honorably fulfilling their obligation. This practice of the Sioux tribe is known as restorative justice, which is about involving the offenders and making things right as best they can for victims, and about restoring the offenders to the community. The Sioux did not want to see Crow Dog executed nor imprisoned. Instead, they saw restorative justice as a means of keeping both of these families in relationship with the community and in a deeper relationship with each other. The last thing they wanted to do was to kill or to isolate any member of the community. In the mind of the Sioux, yes, Crow Dog has done wrong. He must care for Spotted Tail's family, but he also has something to contribute to the tribe, and we still have something to offer him. He needs us, and we need him, and he is still one of us. I believe this model of justice is what Jesus had in mind when he told the parable in today's gospel. Granted, Jesus uses exaggeration to make his point. The first servant owes the king 10,000 talents, which I understand would be about $10 million today. It was an impossible sum to pay back. And the king was not moved by the servant's offer to pay, but instead he was moved by the servant's actions of falling on his knees and pleading with him. Perhaps the king needed forgiving. In our men's Bible study Thursday, we talk about how it is not just the offender who needs forgiveness. The person who is offended can become consumed by this need to forgive, yet have the inability or unwillingness to do so. It can sometimes lead to feeling paralyzed. It can often lead to feeling isolated from the person you need to forgive, isolated from yourself and from the community, isolated from God. The king forgives and restores the relationship with the first servant. But the first servant learns nothing from this and fails to forgive the second servant with a much smaller sum owed him, even after the second servant falls to his knees and pleads for mercy. In fact, the first servant throws the second servant in prison. When word of this spreads in the community, all are outraged and they tell the king. The king then calls back the first servant and punishes him, not for failing to repay his debt to the king, but for isolating another member of the community without giving him a chance to be restored as the king had restored him. Kate Grossmeyer grew up in Memphis, where she married Andy, the love of her life, at St. Peter's Catholic Church. They later moved to Tallahassee for his work. Kate and Andy's whole world turned upside down on Palm Sunday of 2010. That was the day her 19-year-old daughter was shot by her boyfriend, Connor, in the heat of a domestic dispute. She went into a coma. Late one night, her father sat next to her bed in ICU, and he heard her voice saying, "Forgive him." Her lips weren't moving, but he could hear her voice as clearly as he always did. He said, "No, I can't forgive him." Anne said, "Dad, you need to forgive Connor." After 20 minutes of this, he realized it was a back and forth he could not win. Anne would never relent. In exasperation, Andy finally said, "Okay, I'll try." Anne died on Good Friday. Andy shared this late-night conversation with his wife, Kate, and in the midst of their intense anger and grief, they resolved to forgive Connor. They took this a step further and asked the district attorney if they could use restorative justice principles as a part of Connor's trial and sentencing. They arranged to have a Justice Circle meeting with Connor, where he answered a lot of their questions. They expressed their profound loss. He expressed his deep regret. And they forgave him. After their circle, they were successful in getting the judge and district attorney to agree to a shorter sentence for Connor, but they insisted on some stipulations for probation, to which Connor agreed. These included him taking anger management classes and talking to school groups about domestic teen violence and making videos highlighting this issue. Kate and Andy continue to visit Connor, both in prison and now in probation. They have developed close relationships with his family. Connor is part of their life, and they're part of his. A few weeks after the Restorative Justice Council, Andy was driving to church one night when suddenly a large bird flew into the front of his Jeep. He kept driving because he was running late, but a sense of guilt came over him. Anne, who had loved birds, would have hated that he'd left a bird in the road. When he walked up to what he thought was a dead bird, he saw that it was a hawk, and then saw its body twitch. Andy took off his jacket and wrapped it around the bird. He took the hawk to the local wildlife association, and in a month's time, through rehabilitation, the association was able to nurse this young female hawk back to health. They called Andy, and they invited him and Kate to release the bird in a neighborhood park. That day, when Andy opened his hands, the hawk swooped to the ground, then flew to the branch of a tree 50 yards away and perched there. The hawk has made that park her home, and she is still seen soaring overhead or in the branches of the tree. The hawk was released, yet she remains. We all make mistakes, sometimes big ones, sometimes little ones, but we all receive grace, God's grace, forgiveness. Perhaps we can learn the lessons of the past. We aren't perfect, and God knows and loves us anyway. Jesus wants us to share the joy of release that comes from forgiveness. He also wants us all to remain in relationship with him and with each other, no matter what. For together, we live. Together, we love. Together, we soar.